What if I told you that the silence of the universe, the fact that aliens haven't officially landed on the White House lawn or blasted us with orbital lasers or even announced themselves on a global broadcast, is actually the greatest proof we have that humanity is going to survive the next 100 years?
I mean, that is a really profound reframing of how we look up at the night sky.
Right. It totally changes everything. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are tearing into a stack of these predictive reports that don't just ask if we are alone in the universe, they ask a much more dangerous question.
Which is, if we find out definitively that we aren't alone, how does the mere knowledge of that fact force the human species to evolve?
Exactly. And not over millions of years, but like over the next few decades.
Yeah, we have three really exhaustive interdisciplinary frameworks on the table today, all published around May 2026. So that's the Abacus, Perplexity, and CGPT analyses.
And they draw on everything, right? Like evolutionary biology, international relations theory.
Yeah, philosophy of mind, historical sociology, all basically trying to model a post-disclosure world.
And the focal point of all these reports is this concept called niche construction. Basically, how the confirmation of unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP, and non-human intelligence,
NHI.
right, NHI, how confirming that doesn't just change our science books, it completely rewrites the cognitive and cultural environment we live in.
Which in turn forces us to adapt or face, well, civilizational collapse.
Which is pretty heavy. But to understand where we're going, we really got to plant our feet firmly in the reality of where we are right now in May 2026.
Which is a reality characterized by profound cognitive dissonance.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's look at the official institutional baseline. If you go to NASA or the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office,
AARO.
right, ARO, their public stance is rooted in methodological caution. They officially maintain that there is no conclusive, peer-reviewed evidence of extraterrestrial origin or recovered off-world technology.
But, and this is a massive but, that official caution is currently colliding with a frankly overwhelming avalanche of public data and sworn
It
testimony.
really is an avalanche at this point.
Yeah. Let's talk about the ODNI and DoD fiscal year 2024 consolidated report. They cataloged 757 new UAP cases. Hundreds of those remain entirely unresolved, exhibiting characteristics we simply cannot explain with current physics.
And then, of course, the Department of War opened the Pursuit portal.
Right, the Presidential Unsealing and Reporting System for UAP encounters. They released 162 previously highly classified files.
And we need to be clear, those files are not blurry black and white photos of weather balloons.
Not at all.
We are talking about multi-sensor fusion data. You have radar, infrared, electro-optical sensors all locking onto the exact same objects simultaneously.
Let's actually visualize what is in those Pursuit files for you, because it's vital for understanding the shock to our system. You have Navy pilots reporting encounters with objects that look like dark gray cubes inside clear spheres.
Which is such a bizarre aerodynamic shape.
Right. And these objects are holding perfectly stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds. Then, in a fraction of a second, they accelerate to hypersonic speeds like Mach 10, Mach 15 without any visible control surfaces. No wings, no rotors, and absolutely no observable thermal exhaust.
And no sonic boom, which, defies fluid dynamics entirely as we currently understand them.
It's mind-bending.
Furthermore, some of the telemetry data shows these objects executing sharp 90-degree turns at those hypersonic speeds. The G-forces involved would instantly turn a human pilot to soup and shear the wings right off an F-22.
Yeah, they are exhibiting instantaneous materialization, disappearing from radar over the ocean and reappearing 60 miles away at a designated rally point a few seconds later.
They somehow knew the pilot's classified rendezvous point.
That detail alone is staggering, and this data dump is happening at the exact same time that highly credible whistleblowers have stepped into the blinding light of congressional hearings.
Yeah, people like David Grush, a former intelligence officer with top-level clearances, and Luis Elizondo, the former head of the Pentagon's ATIP program.
And they aren't just giving interviews on YouTube. They're sitting under oath, risking perjury and prison, testifying to Congress about multi-decade, unacknowledged special access programs.
They are outlining a highly secretive, compartmentalized arms race. Programs dedicated to reverse engineering intact and partially intact craft of non-human origin, and the recovery of what they term non-human biologics.
So as a regular person, trying to pay your mortgage and raise your kids, you are caught in this bizarre crossfire. The government's public-facing scientific arms are saying nothing to see here yet, folks, while highly decorated intelligence officials are swearing under oath that we have dead aliens and functional flying saucers locked in aerospace contractor warehouses.
Which serves as the perfect catalyst for the evolutionary shock we're about to discuss.
Exactly. Now, before we dive into those evolutionary frameworks, I need to draw a hard line for you. We are not here today to act as judge and jury.
Right, that's not our goal.
We are not claiming the government is running a massive psychological operation, nor are we claiming the whistleblowers are completely infallible. We are simply engaging in conditional futures analysis.
We're operating on an if-then logic. The analytical frameworks model out 3 specific scenarios.
Okay, lay those out for us.
Sure. So there's minimal disclosure, which is the undeniable acknowledgement of anomalous objects without knowing their origin. Moderate disclosure, which confirms the possession of recovered materials or biologics. And full disclosure, involving ongoing, confirmed contact and a total rewriting of human history.
So our mission today is to figure out what happens next in those scenarios. And to do that, I want to bring in this idea of niche construction. I want you to picture early humans facing an impending ice age. The temperature starts dropping globally.
Under classical, slow-moving biological evolution, those humans would just stand there freezing.
Right. Waiting tens of thousands of years for random genetic mutations to give them thicker body hair or a layer of blubber.
Which would, of course, lead to their immediate extinction.
Yeah.
The timeline of biological mutation is just entirely mismatched to the speed of the environmental threat.
Yeah, exactly. So instead of waiting to biologically mutate, what do? They skin a bear and wear its fur. They figure out how to spark a fire. They construct shelters. They fundamentally alter their immediate environment to ensure their survival.
And here is the critical part. That new environment, that specific niche they constructed, then begins to dictate their future evolution.
How so?
Well, because they have fire to cook meat, they no longer need massive jaw muscles to chew raw roots, so their skull shape actually changes over millennia to allow for larger brains.
Wow, okay. So we alter the environment, and the altered environment selects for different traits in us.
That is niche construction theory in a nutshell.
So UAP disclosure is basically the ultimate civilizational scale cognitive house we suddenly have to build and live inside.
Exactly. To really grasp the magnitude of this, we have to look at the 3 evolutionary frameworks the reports lay out. First, there is the one everyone knows, Darwinian natural selection. This relies on random genetic variation and environmental pressures over vast stretches of time.
So just to be super clear, if the president goes on television tomorrow and confirms we have an intact alien craft, the human gene pool isn't going to suddenly mutate. We aren't going to sprout telepathic organs in the next 10 years.
Right. Biological change in the short term, say 0 to 10 years post-disclosure, is effectively nil. Our physical bodies remain the exact same.
Makes sense.
The second framework operating simultaneously is cultural evolution, and this operates on a much faster timeline, generation to generation or even decade to decade.
Like how Gen Z culturally inherited the ability to navigate touchscreens and algorithmic interfaces intuitively, completely bypassing millions of years of biological evolution in just 1 decade.
A perfect modern example. It's almost Lamarckian.
Lamarckian. Remind me what that means.
So in biology, Lamarck famously and incorrectly proposed that a giraffe stretching its neck for leaves over its lifetime would pass a longer neck to its offspring. That doesn't work for biology, but it works perfectly for culture. We acquire knowledge, technological paradigms, and social norms during our lifetimes and transmit them directly to the next generation.
Oh, I see. And the third framework is niche construction theory, tying the biological and the cultural together in a massive feedback loop. But if our physical environment isn't changing, like the gravity is the same, the oxygen levels are the same, what exactly is the environment that disclosure alters?
It is our cognitive and epistemic niche, the fundamental psychological landscape that structures how we understand reality. And the sudden alteration of that landscape triggers something the Perplexity report calls ontological shock.
Ontology being the study of being, the deeply embedded categories we use to organize the universe, like what is natural versus supernatural, what is human versus animal, what belongs to Earth versus what belongs to the stars.
Yes, and a sudden disruption to those foundational categories is profoundly traumatizing to the human psyche. The reports actually draw on proxy data to model this at scale.
Proxy data. From where?
They looked at clinical studies of individuals who underwent severe worldview disruptions, often facilitated by high-dose psychedelic experiences in controlled settings.
Because I guess that's the closest analog we have for a person suddenly realizing their previous understanding of reality was completely fundamentally flawed.
Exactly. And the statistics are sobering. Approximately 17% of individuals who experience a severe, sudden disruption to their fundamental framework of reality suffer persistent existential distress, a prolonged crisis of meaning, anxiety, and a feeling of profound ungrounding.
17%. I mean, let's scale that up. Let's pull that out of the clinical setting and apply it to a global undeniable disclosure event. You are looking at hundreds of millions of people worldwide waking up on a Tuesday facing acute, severe psychological adjustment all at the exact same time.
Yes, the logistics of the shock are staggering.
How do you go to your accounting job the next day? How do hospitals manage the influx of psychiatric crises? How do stock markets function when the people running them realize human economics might be a cosmic joke?
You have a global population that suddenly realizes their prior authorities. The academics who wrote their textbooks, the religious leaders who defined their spiritual place in the universe, the government officials tasked with their security are either structurally unreliable or have been actively deceiving them.
Wait, I gotta push back on this premise a little bit. Are we severely underestimating human resilience here? Let's look at history. We survived the Copernican revolution when we found out the Earth wasn't the center of the universe.
Sure.
We survived Darwin telling us we descended from earlier primates, fundamentally shifting our biological self-image. We threw some tantrums, sure, but we adapted. We integrated that knowledge. Why would this specific ontological shock be the one that breaks the cognitive niche?
Because of the compression of time. The Copernican revolution took roughly 150 years to fully permeate cultural integration. Information traveled at the speed of a horse or a sailing ship.
Right, people had time to get used to the idea.
Exactly. The Darwinian shift took at least 50 years to be deeply absorbed by the general public. A moderate or full UAP disclosure event would happen at the speed of fiber optic cables and social media algorithms. The ontological shock would be instantaneous and globally ubiquitous.
So it's not the information itself that's uniquely lethal, it's the delivery mechanism. It's taking a paradigm shift that used to be diluted over a century and injecting it straight into the cultural bloodstream overnight.
Which means the specific traits required to survive and thrive in this new cognitive environment shift overnight as well.
Okay, so what does a highly adapted human look like in a post-disclosure cognitive niche?
The environment will massively select for cognitive flexibility, the psychological endurance to hold contradictory or bizarre ideas without collapsing into panic. Furthermore, it will aggressively select for epistemic discipline.
Breaking that down, you mean the ability to rigorously evaluate how we know what we know.
Yes, people and institutions that demand chain of custody evidence, who understand sensor fusion, who welcome adversarial review of their data rather than jumping to comforting conclusions.
Yeah.
A high tolerance for deep uncertainty becomes a supreme survival trait.
And interdisciplinary integration too, right?
Absolutely. The old silos of knowledge break down. You will need thinkers who can synthesize quantum physics, theology, evolutionary biology, and intelligence studies simultaneously.
And evolution is a double-edged sword. If those traits are suddenly adaptive, there is a whole set of current human traits that instantly become catastrophic liabilities.
Rigid literalism, for one.
Well,
Anyone whose belief system, whether religious, scientific, or political, relies on absolute, immutable textual literalism will be at a distinct evolutionary disadvantage. They simply won't be able to process the new data.
ethnocentric cosmologies are going to crack wide open too. The deeply held assumption that your specific nation, your specific political system, or even your specific species is the absolute center of the universal story. That arrogance becomes a massive vulnerability.
And perhaps most significantly for our global structures, reliance on information monopolies becomes deeply maladaptive.
Like who?
Institutions like intelligence agencies or legacy media that try to maintain power through strict opacity and top-down control. They will shatter under the intense public pressure for transparency and decentralized analysis.
They become the dinosaurs staring up at the asteroid, unable to comprehend that the climate has already changed.
That's a great way to put it.
And that realization transitions us directly into the medium-term fallout. Let's look 10 to 50 years down the line. The initial psychological dust has settled, people are still going to work, the panic has subsided into a new normal. We shift from thinking differently about our reality to building differently within it. The cognitive shockwave inevitably triggers a technocultural cascade.
The Atticus and CGPT reports heavily index on this phase. Once the reality of advanced non-human technology is verified, even if we don't fully understand the physics behind it yet, that mere verification acts as a massive gravitational pull for human attention and resources.
Let's ditch the old cliches here. This isn't just a Sputnik moment. When Sputnik launched, it was a beach ball that beeped.
Right.
It motivated the U.S. to build rockets, sure, but we already knew how rockets worked. We just needed to build bigger ones. Confirming UAP technology is more like an 18th century sailing captain witnessing a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. It's a gold rush where the gold isn't a metal, but an entirely new fundamental force of nature.
The mobilization of human intellectual capital would be unprecedented. The funding poured into STEM fields, theoretical physics, astrobiology, materials science, and artificial intelligence would dwarf the Manhattan Project and the Apollo program combined. We enter a phase of aggressive cultural niche construction.
And here is the wild part. We might not even need physical access to a crashed saucer to start this process.
That is a very crucial insight from the sources: observational emulation. Just having the verifiable sensor data of what is physically possible, knowing for a fact that a craft can eliminate its own inertial mass or manipulate spacetime to travel at Mach 20 without a heat signature, gives our physicists a target.
Just knowing it's allowed by the laws of physics changes everything.
Precisely. Once you know a mechanism is allowed, the human engine of reverse engineering engages. The evolutionary driver shifts to the speed of institutional learning.
But as our scientists are in the labs trying to bend space-time, our reflection in the mirror is contorting. We are facing a severe Darwinian shock to our self-concept. Darwin pulled us down from a divine pedestal and proved we were part of the animal continuum. UAP disclosure pulls us down from our technological pedestal.
It reveals that we are not the apex intelligence in our own local universe.
We go from strutting around as the undisputed masters of Earth to realizing we are the cosmic equivalent of uncontacted tribes on an island, suddenly watching jetliners fly over our heads. We are merely an emerging, perhaps primitive technological species embedded in a vast, ancient ecology of intelligence. It's incredibly humbling.
And that humbling realization drives one of the most intense, potentially dangerous extrapolations in these reports: the cognitive enhancement arms race.
Okay, let's follow the logic here. If we start understanding NHI technology, and it turns out they don't use steering wheels and joysticks.
Right. If they pilot these craft through advanced neural interfaces, mind-machine integration, or entirely novel computational architectures,
then human transhumanist trajectories, which are already underway, will receive an unimaginable influx of capital and urgency. The development of CRISPR synthetic biology and brain-computer interfaces, like what Neuralink is attempting, will accelerate from a slow crawl to a dead sprint.
and this creates a terrifying societal fracture.
Yeah, we already have a digital divide. Some schools have 3D printers and fiber internet. Others barely have textbooks. Now apply that divide to human biology and brain power. Imagine a world where a wealthy or militarily connected portion of the population gets access to NHI-inspired cognitive augmentation.
They could process information 1,000 times faster, interface directly with AI, maybe even communicate non-verbally.
Yeah.
We are no longer talking about a wealth gap.
What are we talking about then?
We are talking about a literal speciation risk.
Well-
This is the exact mechanism of Darwinian speciation applied to culture and technology.
Walk me through how that actually happens biologically. How does a tech upgrade turn us into two different species?
It comes down to differential cognitive niche access and reproductive isolation. If one group of humans is radically enhanced, their baseline subjective experience of reality, their processing speed, their lifespans, and their values will diverge sharply from baseline unenhanced humans.
And then they just stop interacting with us.
Over a few centuries, social isolation sets in. The enhanced group likely stops intermarrying with the baseline group, either by choice or by biological incompatibility. Divergent selection environments create divergent species. Humanity could literally bifurcate into a post-biological lineage and a baseline legacy lineage.
Wow. And if this neural interface tech gives one group a massive cognitive advantage, it's not just a societal problem, it becomes an immediate national security nightmare. How do nuclear-armed rivals react when they realize their adversary is suddenly thinking 10 times faster? This technocultural evolution isn't happening in an academic vacuum. It's going to be brutal, messy, and deeply political.
Which introduces geopolitics as the ultimate evolutionary filter. How our power structures manage this revelation will dictate which of those cultural traits we discussed actually survive.
Let's view this through the lens of international relations. The immediate response to any formal disclosure of recovered NHI tech is going to be driven by sheer paranoia and information asymmetry. Who has the ship? Who has the biologics? Who is closest to figuring out the propulsion system?
Political scientists view this through the framework of realism. Realism assumes that states operate in an anarchic system where survival is the only goal, and they pursue power to ensure it.
Right.
As we noted, congressional testimony already alleges that the U.S., China, and Russia have been locked in a deeply compartmentalized shadow arms race over UAP tech for decades.
So, an official disclosure event removes the shadow, but it massively spikes what is known as the security dilemma.
The security dilemma is the tragic spiral of international relations. It posits that when State A builds up its defenses simply to feel secure, State B cannot know State A's true intentions. State B interprets those defenses as a latent offensive threat, and so State B builds up its own weapons.
And then State A feels threatened by that.
Exactly.
Mhm.
This makes State A feel less secure, triggering an arms race where everyone feels less safe the more weapons they build.
Let's put a hypothetical scenario on the table. The U.S. president announces we have a partially intact craft, and we are assembling a scientific coalition to study its zero-point energy core to solve climate change. That sounds noble,
Very noble.
but in Beijing and Moscow, that looks like the United States is months away from unlocking an offensive capability that renders all existing nuclear arsenals completely obsolete.
Precisely the danger. The efforts to safely study the technology for peaceful means are structurally indistinguishable from a preemptive military breakout. This incentivizes massive intelligence surges, espionage, and potentially preemptive kinetic strikes to prevent a rival from achieving a monopoly on the physics of the universe.
And all of this geopolitical maneuvering is happening while the core concept of the nation-state is bleeding out on the operating table. The reports highlight something called the Westphalian paradox.
To understand this, we have to look back to the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, which ended the religious wars in Europe. It established the modern concept of state sovereignty.
Meaning what, exactly?
The fundamental premise is that a national government has absolute authority and a monopoly on the legitimate use of force within its defined geographic borders.
So a border isn't just a line on a map, it is a psychological promise. The state promises that if you pay your taxes and obey the laws, it will secure the sky above you and the ground beneath you from external threats.
But UAP activity demonstrates an effortless bypass of these borders. These objects routinely penetrate sovereign airspace, operate with complete impunity around sensitive nuclear installations, and ignore all human jurisdictional boundaries.
If an unknown craft can hover over a Minuteman III nuclear silo in Montana, shut down the launch codes, which we actually have documented testimony of them doing, and then casually drift out into space, the psychological promise of the border is broken.
Complete.
The state is suddenly exposed as utterly impotent. It can no longer claim to be the ultimate protector of its citizens.
The erosion of state legitimacy creates a vacuum. And depending on how global leadership responds to that vacuum, humanity will construct one of two vastly divergent evolutionary niches.
The reports call them the competitive niche and the cooperative niche. Let's look at the dark timeline first. The competitive niche.
In a conflict-driven response, nations panic. They attempt to aggressively hoard the technology, militarize their scientific institutions, and lock down information.
So we just hunker down in our silos.
Exactly. And the evolutionary environment that creates is extremely regressive. It selects for tribalism, xenophobia, extreme institutional opacity, and authoritarian control.
Because everyone's terrified.
Yes. In the name of national security, populations willingly surrender democratic oversight for the promise of rapid capability acquisition. We cognitively devolve to survive a high-threat, zero-sum environment.
The alternative is the cooperative, or global niche. The idea here is that the sheer, overwhelming nature of the NHI presence, the realization that we are all just tiny humans on a rock, forces a shift toward global governance. We develop a layered supranational system of planetary sovereignty.
In that environment, the traits that guarantee success are cosmopolitan identity, massive cross-cultural scientific translation, and long-horizon, multi-generational thinking.
Hold on, I really have to play devil's advocate here. Let's look at human nature for a second. We didn't hold hands and share the atomic bomb to create a global utopia. We pointed them at each other for 50 years, engaged in proxy wars that killed millions, and nearly ended the world during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
That is a very fair point.
Why on earth would the defense contractors currently hiding these UFO materials suddenly sing Kumbaya and share it with the world? History tells us the competitive route is almost a guarantee.
That is the dominant realist critique, and it is highly valid. However, the reports introduce a variable that might fundamentally alter the game theory matrix. It revolves around the specific nature of the technology itself. The concept is technology indivisibility.
How does technology indivisibility change the math of an arms race?
Consider the difference between a nuclear warhead and the foundational protocols of the Internet, TCP/IP. A nuclear weapon is a zero-sum exclusionary technology. Its entire value lies in the fact that I can destroy you with it while remaining safe myself. It naturally breeds secrecy and hoarding.
But the internet is the exact opposite.
Correct. The Internet is indivisible. Its architecture intrinsically facilitates global cooperation because a network of two computers is essentially useless. But a network of 2 billion computers transforms human commerce and communication. The network gains exponential value the more entities utilize it.
So if NHI technology is fundamentally indivisible, let's say it's not a laser cannon, but an understanding of how to tap the background vacuum energy of spacetime, offering limitless decentralized power.
Then the zero-sum logic of strategic competition dissolves. You cannot easily hoard a localized understanding of the fabric of reality if the application of that knowledge inherently creates post-scarcity energy grids. The nature of the discovery might structurally compel cooperation.
Wow. If it's a weapon, we fracture and likely destroy ourselves. If it's foundational infrastructure for reality, we might be forced to cooperate, dragging us kicking and screaming into planetary maturity. That is a terrifying tightrope to walk.
And geopolitics only addresses physical survival. The psychological tightrope is just as precarious.
If the geopolitical niche dictates whether our bodies survive the transition, our philosophical frameworks dictate whether our minds survive it. We're looking at a total ground-up overhaul of how human beings understand consciousness itself. The Perplexity Report dedicates a massive amount of ink to the crisis this poses for the philosophy of mind.
Currently, the dominant operating system for Western science and academia is physicalism, also known as materialism.
Physicalism being the idea that the universe is made of dead matter, and consciousness is just a fortunate biological accident. It's the belief that the mind is essentially meat computing, just electrical impulses, firing across complex neural networks in our brains. When the brain dies, the mind vanishes.
It is the premise that mind is an emergent secondary property of physical complexity.
Yeah.
But this framework faces an existential crisis upon disclosure.
How so?
If we observe an NHI that exhibits non-biological consciousness, imagine encountering a highly advanced machine intelligence, a decentralized collective superorganism, or entities that demonstrate telepathy or exist independent of a biological substrate.
It shatters the absolute authority of physicalism. The hard problem of consciousness, the question of how subjective experience arises from physical matter, suddenly gets a lot harder. It doesn't mean physicalism is completely useless, it just proves it's incomplete. It's no longer the universal rule of the cosmos.
The explanatory adequacy of materialism breaks down. And when a dominant paradigm falters, alternative philosophical models that have been marginalized for centuries suddenly surge in evolutionary fitness. They offer explanatory power that physicalism lacks.
The primary beneficiary of this shift would be panpsychism. Let's really break down how radical this is. Panpsychism is the view that consciousness isn't a byproduct of matter, but a fundamental, ubiquitous property of the universe, right alongside mass, spin, and electrical charge.
It posits that consciousness is not generated by the brain. It is filtered or expressed through the brain. The raw material of consciousness is baked into the fabric of reality itself.
Think about how a human scientist under the old physicalist paradigm would examine a crashed UAP. They'd look for wires, fuel lines, a steering column.
Right, looking for mechanical linkages.
But a scientist operating under panpsychism might approach the craft, assuming the material itself possesses a form of rudimentary consciousness. They might test the hull of the ship, not just for tensile strength, but for its capacity to interface with human thought. It completely reorients the scientific method.
The reports also highlight extended mind theories, which argue that consciousness is not confined to the skull, but actively extends into our tools and environments. Or dual-aspect monism, the proposition that mind and matter are simply two sides of the exact same underlying, undiscovered reality.
This level of philosophical upheaval isn't just going to stay contained in university lecture halls. It bleeds directly into our religious institutions and our everyday meaning-making systems. And there is a massive misconception here that needs to be addressed.
You mean the Hollywood trope?
Right. Every sci-fi movie tells us that the day the flying saucer lands on the White House lawn, people will throw their Bibles, Korans, and Torahs into the street, and organized religion will instantly evaporate.
The sociologists who authored these reports explicitly state that is a cartoonishly simplistic view of human faith. Religion won't collapse, it will adapt. But different traditions face highly specific, unique vulnerabilities.
The analysis breaks down these differing pressure points brilliantly. The Abrahamic traditions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, are modeled to face acute, severe stress due to a concept theologians call soteriological uniqueness.
Soteriological uniqueness, meaning the doctrine that the story of salvation, the redemptive arc of history, is uniquely focused on humanity and the planet Earth.
Consider the theological implications. If an NHI predates human civilization by tens of millions of years and operates across multiple star systems, the anthropocentric narrative, the idea that the creator of the universe is exclusively focused on the moral behavior of one primate species on one rock, comes under immense pressure.
Imagine a Vatican theologian having to draft a sermon explaining that Christ's incarnation and sacrifice wasn't a singular universe-defining event, but perhaps something that had to be repeated in different forms on millions of other planets.
How does an everyday churchgoer process that on a Sunday morning? It's cognitively overwhelming.
Although, as the reports note, institutions like the Vatican have deep intellectual reserves. The Catholic Observatory has already engaged in extensive speculation about extraterrestrial life, maintaining that aliens would still be part of God's creation. They have some doctrinal elasticity.
In stark contrast, the Eastern traditions and indigenous frameworks might navigate this ontological shock with significantly less structural friction.
Their cosmological architecture is fundamentally different. Buddhism and Hinduism operate on vast, nearly incomprehensible scales of time, kalpas, and explicitly outline multiple realms of consciousness and countless varieties of non-human sentient beings.
Discovering an advanced telepathic alien species wouldn't break a Buddhist cosmology. It would just be categorized as another form of sentient life trapped in the cycle of samsara.
Exactly. And indigenous animist frameworks, which view the natural world and the cosmos as deeply alive and populated by varied intelligences, have cultural narratives perfectly anticipatory of this. They aren't burdened by the arrogant assumption that Earth is the sole theater of significance.
But regardless of how elastic a religious tradition is, a civilizational scale paradigm shift always breeds massive ideological turbulence. The sources point to historical precedents.
Yeah, after Darwin published On the Origin of Species, dismantling the special creation narrative, we didn't just get secular atheism, we saw a massive surge in alternative spiritualities like theosophy and spiritualism.
People trying to reconcile science and the supernatural. And after the trauma of the atomic bomb, we saw the birth of UFO religions, some of which turned incredibly dark, like Heaven's Gate.
This is the risk of epistemic collapse, a mass ontological shock, especially if our legacy institutions are caught lying or are unable to provide a coherent framework to help people process the new reality, creates a terrifying societal vulnerability.
It's like tearing down the only bridge in a town. If credible institutions, governments, respected scientists, mainstream theologians, don't urgently collaborate to build a new, sturdy narrative bridge, the public will panic. And drowning people will latch on to any raft floating by, no matter how toxic or dangerous it is.
Ontological instability is the historical precondition for authoritarian consolidation and extremist cults. When people experience the total shattering of their reality, their tolerance for ambiguity drops to zero. They desperately crave certainty.
So they'll follow anyone who sounds confident.
Yes. Charismatic leaders offering ready-made, absolutist explanations, whether they claim the NHI are literal demons to be fought or literal gods to be worshipped, will amass massive followings.
Which means the management of the disclosure process is arguably more important than the content of the disclosure itself. If it's a gradual, transparent process led by credible institutions, society has the time to adaptively reconstruct its niche. If it's abrupt, chaotic, or forced out by adversarial leaks, we maximize the shock and risk total societal fragmentation.
To predict which way the scales will tip, the analytical frameworks urge us to look at humanity's track record with massive paradigm shifts. We've been here before, albeit on smaller scales.
Let's walk through those historical analogs. We have a history of having the rug pulled out from under our worldview.
The primary analog is the Copernican revolution, beginning in 1543. Copernicus displaced Earth from the physical center of the cosmos. As we discussed earlier, the time scale for cultural integration was roughly 150 years.
And it faced massive institutional resistance, most notably Galileo's house arrest by the Inquisition.
Right. The lesson there being that institutions will violently defend the old paradigm because their earthly power is entirely reliant upon it. Then we hit Darwinian evolution in 1859. This displaced us from our biological center. We weren't fallen angels, we were risen apes. It took about 50 years to deeply integrate.
But look at how it integrated. It was rapidly weaponized. The scientific theory of natural selection was twisted into social Darwinism, a pseudoscience used to justify brutal imperialism, unregulated hypercapitalism, and eventually the horrors of eugenics.
The new knowledge is immediately instrumentalized by the worst impulses of human power structures. Then we compress the timeline dramatically with the nuclear era in 1945. We unlocked the power to unmake the world.
The integration timescale was brutally short. Within 5 to 10 years, global society had to invent and integrate the concept of existential deterrence, mutually assured destruction, and structure the entire Cold War around it.
And currently, we are in the throes of the AI emergence. Artificial intelligence is actively challenging our final frontier of uniqueness, which is our cognitive supremacy.
Synthesizing these 4 historical shocks reveals 3 brutal truths. 1, resistance precedes integration. 2, political weaponization of the new paradigm is practically guaranteed. And 3, integration is not inevitable.
It's not guaranteed at all.
We barely survived the invention of the printing press. It democratized information, yes, but it also fueled decades of bloody religious warfare across Europe because the institutional structures couldn't handle the sudden influx of competing narratives. Safe integration requires 2 things: deep institutional credibility and time. And a sudden UAP disclosure event directly threatens both.
Which leads us to the most profound and ultimately hopeful insight buried in these reports. The great filter reframe.
This completely flipped my brain inside out. Let's walk through the Drake equation and the Fermi paradox conceptually.
Okay, lay it out.
The universe is incredibly vast and incredibly old. There are billions of stars with billions of habitable planets. Statistically, the galaxy should be teeming with sprawling, highly visible, advanced civilizations. We should see Dyson spheres blocking out stars or hear radio chatter.
Yet we see nothing. We hear nothing. Thus, Enrico Fermi's famous question, where is everybody?
And the most terrifying proposed answer to that paradox is the great filter hypothesis. The idea that there is some universal, unavoidable, catastrophic bottleneck in the developmental trajectory of any technological species, a barrier that almost no one survives.
Historically, humanity has assumed that the great filter is ahead of us. We assume that as soon as a species invents nuclear weapons or creates artificial superintelligence or alters its planetary climate, it inevitably annihilates itself within a few centuries.
We look up at the silent sky and assume the universe is a giant cosmic haunted house, and everyone who walked through the front door before us got eaten by the monster. We assume we are doomed. But if these whistleblowers are right...
If the PRC files are accurate.
Right, and non-human intelligence is already here.
It drastically alters the probabilistic math of our own survival. If NHI are operating within our atmosphere, but the galaxy isn't visibly conquered by a loud, aggressive empire, it implies one of 2 things. Either the great filter is still ahead of them, meaning they are advanced but still vulnerable, or they are actively managing their developmental footprint.
But the most staggering implication is this. If they are here, flying craft that warp space-time, it proves definitively that it is physically and socially possible to survive the invention of universe-breaking technology.
Precisely. The fact that they exist and haven't destroyed their home worlds or ours is the ultimate proof of concept. It demonstrates that a species can navigate its technological adolescence without committing suicide.
It means survival isn't impossible, it just requires a level of maturity we haven't reached yet. It requires constraints, cooperative protocols, and qualitative leaps in global governance that human institutions simply haven't mastered. The presence of NHI is an existential risk, yes, but it is also an existential roadmap. It proves the bottleneck can be squeezed through.
As we synthesize the entirety of these reports, the macro picture becomes incredibly clear. Disclosure is not a cinematic event. It is not an alien invasion where spaceships blow up landmarks.
It is a multi-century civilizational reclassification event. It forces humanity to forcefully reinterpret itself biologically, politically, technologically, spiritually, and philosophically.
We are being shoved out of the comfortable, human-centric environment we've inhabited for millennia and forced into a vastly more complex, incredibly dangerous, new evolutionary niche. In this new space, our traditional weapons and rigid dogmas are useless.
The traits that will ensure our survival are cognitive flexibility, a shared planetary identity, rigorous epistemic discipline, and radically transparent institutions.
The revelation of NHI matters, but how humanity chooses to reconstruct our society in the wake of that revelation matters infinitely more.
The decisive question posed by the abacus, perplexity, and CGPT frameworks is ultimately a test of our species' maturity. Can humanity convert profound ontological shock into adaptive, unified growth? Or will we collapse under the weight of a larger reality, retreating into epistemic chaos, tribal warfare, and civilizational fragmentation?
It's the ultimate test.
It really is. And as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, slightly unsettling thought experiment to mull over. Something that wasn't deeply covered in our geopolitical breakdown, but stems directly from the idea of interacting with vastly superior technology.
The dependency issue.
Yes. Think about the concept of dependency and agency erosion. Let's imagine the most benevolent scenario possible. Let's say we officially make contact, and the NHI hand us the keys to the kingdom. They give us a black box that solves our global energy crisis overnight. No more fossil fuels, no more climate change, the world is saved.
But we receive it without actually understanding the underlying physics.
Exactly. We don't do the centuries of agonizing math, we just push the button and enjoy the free electricity. Do we risk permanently stunting our own intellectual evolution? Imagine a future where humanity is kept perfectly safe, completely provided for, but we become permanently intellectually dependent on an intelligence we can't comprehend.
Like pets in a managed cosmic terrarium.
We lose the drive to explore because the answers are just handed to us. Is sheer survival enough? Or is the agonizing, dangerous, messy struggle to understand the universe through our own flawed efforts the very thing that makes us human?
It circles right back to the beginning of our conversation. The desire for the clean, binary X-ray. We want the doctor to just point at the screen, give us the diagnosis, and hand us the pill that fixes everything without any effort on our part.
But stepping into this new post-disclosure cognitive niche means accepting that the X-ray machine is broken. The universe is infinitely more complex and perhaps more terrifying than we were taught. No one is coming to do the homework for us. We have to learn to navigate these profound, muddy waters ourselves. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the evolutionary impact of disclosure. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep looking up, and remember, the environment you build is the environment that builds you.